when the silence came, the day Nigeria mourned Buhari. The news came at dawn, quiet, almost like a whisper carried by the wind across the Nigerian savannah. At first, no one believed it. Former President Muhammadu Buhari, the retired general, the man who once ruled with iron and later governed with restraint, was dead. The country froze. In the stillness of the early hours, it felt like the entire nation exhaled, then held its breath. Radio stations went silent. Television screens flickered to black and white montages. Markets stalled. And from Dora to Lagos, a single question hung heavy in the air. What does Nigeria become without Buhari? It began like any ordinary day in Katsina. The air was dry, the sun golden over the rooftops of Dora. Former President Muhammadu Buhari had long retired to a quiet life after leaving office in 2023. He spent his mornings reading newspapers, tending to his cows, and offering occasional commentary on national issues through brief public statements. He was a man of few words, yet his presence commanded attention. Even in retirement, his influence loomed, discreet yet unmistakable. On the morning of July 12, his longtime security aide, Yusuf, noticed something unusual. Buhari had not emerged for his morning prayers. The Quran remained untouched on the polished wooden stool by his bedside. Inside the room, the fan hummed softly, curtains fluttered, and the general lay still, unmoving. Medical responders were called instantly, but it was already too late. Cardiac arrest, they said. He died in his sleep peacefully. He was 83. By 7 a.m., the presidential villa in Abuja had been informed. By 7:30, the chief of army staff, the Sultan of Sokoto, and the heads of state security were all briefed. Nigeria's leadership machine moved quickly. They knew the gravity of what had just happened. By 9 a.m., a solemn-faced spokesperson from Aso Rock addressed the nation. With deep sorrow and gratitude to Almighty Allah, we announce the passing of His Excellency, Muhammadu Buhari, former President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. The nation staggered. Markets paused trading. Mosques echoed with Quranic recitations. Churches rang solemn bells. Social media flooded with tributes, arguments, and tears. Some mourned a patriot. Others relived wounds from his controversial past. But no one ignored the news. Buhari had shaped Nigeria in war, in peace, and in silence. His death reopened every chapter of his complex legacy. In Dora, thousands gathered. The gates of his compound were overwhelmed with mourners. Men in traditional igbadas and military veterans in old uniforms shed tears side by side. Local boys beat talking drums, not in celebration, but in reverence. Women sat in clusters, reading Quranic verses, whispering blessings. In Abuja, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu declared 7 days of national mourning. The national flag flew at half-mast. Schools and public offices closed. Tributes poured in from former presidents. Obasanjo called it the end of an era. Goodluck Jonathan, who once stood against Buhari in a bitter election, said, "History will remember him not just as a soldier or politician, but as a man who believed deeply, perhaps stubbornly, in his version of a better Nigeria." Internationally, leaders reacted. From Washington, a significant African figure passes. From London, a statesman who shaped a nation's path through difficult waters. From ECOWAS, a towering leader in West African politics. But not all tributes were glowing. On social media, bitter memories resurfaced. The Lekki Toll Gate massacre, the handling of the hashtag #EndSARS protests, the repressive media clampdowns. Southern youth, especially, remembered the silence of the government in the face of brutality. Old tweets were dug up. Hashtags trended. Hashtag never forget and hashtag rest in power or rest in question. Nigeria, in mourning, was also reckoning. According to Islamic rites, Buhari was to be buried quickly, but exceptions were made for the national figure he was. Military aircraft arrived in Dora. The Nigerian army, in full ceremonial dress, performed a silent parade. The national anthem was played by a brass band, haunting and slow. He was wrapped in white cloth, lowered into the red earth beneath the old baobab tree, behind his compound, the same place he said he wanted to be buried when he first spoke of death in 2017. As the imam concluded the janazah prayers, jets flew low overhead in a final salute. The land was silent again. By the fifth day, the shock had dulled, and the real national conversation began. Who was Muhammadu Buhari, really? Was he the incorruptible general who tried to cleanse a nation of rot, or the authoritarian who silenced dissent? Was he a patriot who tried to revive agriculture and infrastructure, or a man blind to the ethnic and regional fractures that widen under him? TV stations aired documentaries. One titled From Dora to Doden Barracks traced his rise, from his days as a young soldier, to his coup in 1983, to his overthrow in 1985, and his democratic return in 2015. Archival clips resurfaced. His stern broadcast after taking power in 1983. His stiff, defiant face during interviews. His tears when he lost in 2011, declaring, "This is my last attempt." His triumph in 2015, making history as the first opposition to defeat a sitting president in Nigeria. Schools debated him. Newspapers dissected him. The nation, once again, had Buhari on its lips. In the end, his story wasn't just about governance. It was about Nigeria itself. Buhari represented something powerful to many, a symbol of strength, order, and moral rigidity. To others, he represented old wounds, military dominance, northern favoritism, generational silence. But as the days turned to weeks, Nigerians began to speak of him less as a saint or villain, and more as a man who believed in discipline, in duty, in nation. In Dora, his home was turned into a heritage museum. His cows still roamed the compound. His prayer beads remained on his reading table. A dusty portrait of his late wife, Aisha, who had died 2 years before him, hung on the wall. One of his grandchildren, a boy of 11, once asked the old imam, "Was Grandpa a good man?" The imam paused, looked toward the prayer mat where Buhari once knelt, and said, "He tried." In the eyes of Allah, effort matters, and only Allah judges best. 40 days later, a national memorial was held. In Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, and Kaduna, candles were lit. Old political enemies sat beside allies. Generals saluted. Children in schools sang a special anthem written in his honor. From the desert sands to the ocean shores, he stood as father, flawed and firm. In silence now he rests and roars. In memory's halls he shall return. And so Nigeria moved on, not forgetting, but learning, not perfect, but maturing. Buhari's chapter had closed, but his story became a lesson in leadership, history, and the ever-turning wheel of power. In the end, the silence he left behind was louder than any speech he ever gave. Please subscribe for more follow, and support our YouTube by subscribing.